Hello and welcome to another Enchantment of Eternity Patreon video where I will be talking about continuing my coverage of Star Trek the Animated Series. I am recording this now while I'm on vacation in New Zealand, but of course I have some time, so I thought I gotta keep up with the Patreon-only video series. Anyway, I'm here now to talk about episodes 13 and 14 of Season 1 of the animated series. So let me start with Episode 13, the Ambergris Element. I always want to call it the Ambergris Incident, but it's the Element, Ambergris Element. So I mentioned before in the previous video that they had these novels that was based off of it was like books containing a bunch of short stories, and it was actually each short story was an adaptation of an episode from the animated series. So it's basically both these novels had all the animated series in two novels. And before I had access, I was able to watch the animated series because I didn't really have, it wasn't on TV and it cost too much to buy the VHS. I read the books, and I talked about that before because this episode here, the Ambergris Element, was the only short story that I read, and I didn't even make it through because I thought it was boring. Now, I was attracted to this episode in particular because I thought the concept of an ocean world and these aliens that live underwater was very fascinating to me. But honestly, watching the animated series now, I realized this was the wrong short story to pick to read. Because especially in written word, it was boring. And this episode, even watching it, is boring. So it's the wrong episode for me to choose. Because this is a boring, by the numbers, by the book episode. Now, a lot of the episodes of the animated series are boring, to be honest, because, as I mentioned before, just the format of the way they talk, how stilted the characters are, and they just pretty much spout technobabble and exposition, makes the animated series in general a bit tedious to watch. But this episode in particular was very formulaic. I mean, there was a lot of the stilted just exposition. Ooh, this is a blood planet, blah, 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 blah. And on top of that, they meet these alien creatures who are like, oh, are they bad guys? They're bad guys. And I've seen this plot a billion times before. So it doesn't really offer anything new. And plus, they have these really poorly animated sea creatures with the same stock roaring noise they've been using throughout the entire animated series. And so that's not very interesting to watch either. So this episode doesn't actually offer much. I mean, I think the one thing I think this episode does have going is the concept of it. The concept of going to an alien world that's covered in water and Kirk being turned and Spock being turned into underwater breathers, and they can only breathe underwater. They have to go to an underwater city. This is the kind of thing that they could never do in the live-action original series because they would not have the budget. I mean, even nowadays, they would probably have to fork out a whole crap ton of money in order to do an episode like this. So being able to do it animated really shortcuts all of that. So that was always the benefit of the animated series, is that the limit was your imagination for the most part, and the stilted animation. And so it takes advantage of that, and it is interesting to see Kirk interacting with these underwater people and sea creatures attacking them and whatnot. It's just that the underwater people, again, they're just very typical of your typical aliens that distrust the humans. In this case, it's the air breathers, and it makes me think of Stranger Things. But anyway, so they, so it was very by the numbers. Now, I got a few nitpicks about this episode too, because Kirk and Spock, they get attacked by this sea creature thing, and they go missing, and you hear the captain's log where Scotty's saying, oh, we've been looking for 5 days for Kirk and Spock. And you see McCoy on this motorboat with binoculars. Why the fuck didn't they just use their sensors? I mean, I actually went back and watched this episode a second time to see if I missed it, if there was a line of dialogue that explained, oh, our scanners aren't working, which would just be a BS explanation. But at least it would explain it. But no, I watched it twice. There's no line like that. There's no explanation whatsoever to why the fuck they didn't just scan the planet and be like, there's the shuttlecraft. Oh, look, there's a human and Vulcan life sign. They spent the planet 5 days going on boats with binoculars. Alright, I'm sorry. I cannot get over that. Later in the episode, they did have some BS explanation as to why they couldn't detect the sea monster that attacked them. They said that there's energy coming from underneath the surface or whatever, so I suppose you could extend that to why they couldn't scan for Kirk and Spock, but I dismiss that excuse. I think that excuse is utterly invalid because they didn't even mention it. They didn't bring it up. They only brought it up in reference to the sea creature. They never explained why the fuck they had to use binoculars to look for Kirk and Spock. So they fail any way you get around it. But anyway, and also I kept thinking the whole time, like, Kirk and Spock have on uniforms, their same uniform. Wouldn't they wear like underwater gear, like some sort of wetsuit, if they're like have to live in water in a tank? And plus, they're like, Kirk is like, they're in this tank in sick bay, and Kirk's like, we need to fix this problem. I need to breathe air again because I can't really command the starship from sick bay. And I was like, why didn't he just put like a helmet on, like underwater helmet on? They show it at the end of the fucking episode when those underwater beings come up on the Enterprise. They're wearing his helmet. Why can't he just wear one of those? And also, like, because Scotty has this, like, they had these nifty, in the animated series, they had these nifty, like, force fields that surround them that let them go into space, which is a cool concept that the live action shows never took advantage of. Maybe it cost too much to make it look cool. But anyway, Scotty was using that to go underwater. So why couldn't Kirk just use that thing but fill up with water so he could walk around the Enterprise with it? I don't know. I mean, I feel kind of bad poking holes at, an animated show, because usually animated shows are, meant for kids. They're not really supposed to be foolproof. But I don't know. I think these holes are pretty damn big, even for an animated show. Yeah, and, like, I don't know, this episode was just boring. Like, the whole thing, like, where the young were able to help, wanting to help Kirk, but the elder people were like, we don't trust air breathers, and then they had to go get the venom from the sea creature that had the generic roaring sound, and whatever. I mean, it's not a terrible episode. There's definitely much worse in the animated series, but this is a very by-the-numbers bland episode. So I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10. My rating will reflect that blandness. Anyway, let me get on over to the next episode, which is the Slaver Weapon. Now, this episode is, I think I might have encountered this kind of concept before, because this episode is hard for me. I had to have two standards in which to judge this episode by. Because if I judge it as a normal Star Trek episode in the Star Trek franchise, like comparing it to other episodes in the live-action series like Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Discovery, Next Generation, then this episode's terrible. However, this is an animated series. It's a cartoon that is meant, and I brought this up a lot of times before because that's cartoonish, but it's a cartoon. It's a cartoon geared towards kids. So I feel like I need to take that into account. And when I take that into account, this is actually a fairly good episode for a cartoon show. I think it does come off as cartoonish and appealing to kids, but it's supposed to. So it kind of does its job in that manner. Like, for example, the episode Spock's Brain, which most people say is the worst episode of the original series. I think it's so bad it's good. If that was in the animated series, I would think that's a good episode for kids, because, in fact, even in the live action form, I think that if I look at it for this is meant for younger audiences, I can kind of see the difference there. So if it was a cartoon, if it was an animated show, episode. I don't think people will be saying it's the worst thing ever. I think they'll be saying, do you have to give it an allotment for being for kids? And I think it's the same thing with this episode. However, this episode does make a very strong case to why people do not consider the animated series canon. Now, I know CBS, when they acquired the rights, they want more people to watch it, and they want to put it up on all the streaming services, so they officially changed it to be canon because they want the monies. They want the monies. But this episode, if you're not familiar, if you haven't watched it recently, it's about these slaver weapons from an ancient race known as the Slavers, whatever original name, that existed 10 million or thousands or years or whatever unrealistic number the writer grabbed from his ass. They existed a really long time ago in a galaxy, well, the same galaxy. But anyway, long time ago. Anyway, so that's the lore, that there's this race of slavers, and there's a huge war between them, and he left these artifacts that are still in the galaxy. It has a very fantastical feel to it. This, of course, is never brought up ever again, and is kind of contradicted and sort of wiped away from canon. And I think rightfully so. And then we're introduced to this alien... what the fuck were they called? I can't remember what they were called. These alien silly tiger-like creatures. The Zeniti, I think they're called. And when I thought about it, I was like, you know what? They should have just called the Zenkethi the Zeniti. So at least it would have some ties into canon, because the Zenkethi, if you don't remember Deep Space Nine, there's the alien race that were brought up. It was like, oh, they're a huge major player, and we don't want to go with war with them. They're only mentioned like 2 episodes, which really pissed me off. Like, just have an existing alien instead of just making one up that never factors in any way. So I thought, if they were mentioned in the animated series, that would at least would give their species more credit, but no. Is actually Zeniti. So anyway, the Zeniti in this episode, they mentioned that they tried to conquer Earth like 6 times before. So again, it's establishing all this lore that they went to war with the Federation 6 times, or at least with humans. And of course, they're only mentioned in this 1 episode. So that's what I'm saying, that this is it's hard to, I mean, there's other parts of the animated series that they do respect in canon, that are referenced. Like I talked about it, the one with Spock. What's it called? Yesterday something. Oh, Yesteryear. That's referenced, and there's a couple other episodes that actually are referenced. So they are considered canon, but this one clearly is not. This clearly contradicts everything else in Star Trek lore, and it's completely ignored. And I think with good meaning, because that alien race, the Zeniti, whatever the fuck they're called, they're goofy. And as I said, they work for a cartoon show aimed towards kids, but to have them be an actual alien that exists in the Star Trek universe, no, they're goofy, they're silly, they're stupid, and the dialogue was so stupid. I'm not talking to you, vegetable eater. I only talk to meat eaters like me. And I know this is the 70s, but Spock, he wasn't very politically correct in his wording. He was just like, the Zeniti females are dumb and docile, dumb and unthinking. I'm like, that's pretty, I don't know. I don't think the time period, context, or whatever makes it different. I think in even the 70s, that's pretty fucking rude there, Mr. Spock. Just my thought of it. Anyway, so yeah, and so they're basically these dumb tiger-like alien creatures that are goofy beyond belief, and the dialogue was goofy. The fact that there's just the slaver weapon that they found in the box was some gun that kept changing shapes, and I thought Spock was like, and a computer was talking to it from this, tiny weapon. Spock's like, I don't think it's any possible to have an intelligent computer and a device that small. fucking Siri, fucking Alexa. I mean, come on. It's like 50 years ago, but still, it only took 50 years. Although you wouldn't call them intelligent, Siri's or Alexa. But the computer voice in this weapon wasn't really that intelligent either. I would say it's just as intelligent as Siri, if you ask me. Although it did trick the Zenity, and I don't think Siri would be able to do it. So maybe slightly more. But anyway, point is, by the time we get to the 23rd century, having an intelligence in something that small should be easily done, considering we're almost we're halfway there already. But anyway, I know technology in the 60s and 70s, yeah, sci-fi just never matches up. So yeah, so I did other things I liked about this episode. I liked the focus on Sulu. Again, this is one of the strengths of the animated series. They do seem to outplay some of their side characters that got no play in the original series, particularly Sulu. This episode was focused on Spock, Sulu, and Uhura. So other than Spock, we focused more on Sulu and Uhura, and like Sulu actually kind of took command in a lot of places because the Zenity didn't respect the vegetable eating Vulcans. So that's so dumb. So Sulu had to sort of take, but we got more of George Takei's voice acting and more of Sulu action, so I do appreciate that. And I think, as I said, the story about these dumb aliens trying to outwit the Enterprise crew and get this weapon, it works for a cartoon. Like, if I was thinking, comparing it to other cartoons, even the 70s, 80s, even 90s, I'd say this is a decent episode. So I'm gonna rate it on that scale, and I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10. I almost thought about giving it a 7, but I think that's too generous because the dialogue was still, even for a cartoon, was a bit cheesy. You stupid meat eaters. But the plot and the way it played out was fun. It was a fun cartoon. But if I were rating it on a different scale, comparing it to like Next Gen Deep Space Nine, this would probably get like a 3 or 2. But I'm gonna have that different scale because I think it accounts. I think you have to take the fact that it's animated into account. Anyway, that's it for my review of these 2 animated episodes. I shall be back next month, recording from the United States next time, with my review of the next 2 episodes of the animated series. In the meantime, thank you guys so much, very much, for supporting the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.